Thanks a lot for this impressive talk and also for the impressive line of work that led to this. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. I think your second question and my questions are already answered, but the first one is still open. So Yo is asking whether actually all cookies that a website is using should be made explicit. And I have a follow-up to that. That is consent actually the right approach here? If I see your example of a website with, what was it, 5 cookies and 500 plus potential vendors getting tracking information, then I don't think that any user has the ability to even understand what data is recorded by whom and used for what purpose, right? So I'm wondering if, your opinion, if consent is even the right approach to manage tracking in the ecosystem that we have right now.
Cristiana, you take the first one?
Yeah, I can take the first one. So even if it is not mandatory to declare all purposes, so the ones that are not exempted of consent, these are totally the non-necessary cookies, non-necessary trackers are very important to be shown. It's mandatory, right? We also have the opinion that the let me put this straight. We analyze in our talk, right, that consent is needed for necessary cookies. So these ones, there are no discussion. Regarding purposes for which consent is not necessary, interestingly, there is a practice of several DPAs that actually advise organizations, websites to declare even the purposes for these trackers to enable transparency, to enable also auditors in a scalable way to detect their purposes. Otherwise, it's very hard to escalate any sort of legal compliance methods, right, in an automatic way. It's very hard also to scrutinize the privacy policies. And we know already that purposes are formulated in very complex, ambiguous, and imprecise and unspecified way. So we also have seen DPAs in their own websites presenting purposes that are actually exempted of consent, also in explicit tables. So yeah. Even if it is not mandatory, it is advisable even at the DPA level. Yeah. Does this answer your question? Okay. The second question, Nataliia?
Yeah, so for the second question, basically, so Jan, about this example of 5 purposes and 500 and so vendors. So the requirement of GDPR is actually that the purposes are specific, and several DPAs like the CNIL says that what's most important is to show to the users the purposes. And they recommend that first the user makes choices about the purposes, and then at the second level, for each purpose, who are the vendors that are participating in the usage of this purpose. Okay, so that's for the first kind of understandability of the users. Second of all, I don't think that I'm not sure that the consent per se is wrong. It's the way that it's collected that is problematic today. So if we imagine that you could express your consent in your browser settings, if we imagine that we had standardized purposes across the whole ecosystem and everyone could say in your browser settings, I'm okay with this purpose, but I'm not okay with this one, that could make it. That would be enough. But today we don't have anything like that. In the latest proposal for the privacy regulation text, this the article that allows to express your consent in your browser settings is gone due to lobbying.
And consent as it is today will remain. There is, as Nataliia was saying, a mere possibility of expressing consent through browser settings is not enforceable provision, but so we will still have consent pop-ups, at least as it is shown in the current draft.
Then let's have a look at the question from Job. So he's asking to what extent that relates to other tracking techniques like in-browser tracking like Google's Flock or our last seminar here was actually about CNAME tracking by Jana, who's going to ask a question later as well. So their consent is either not really, applicable because it's something that is integrated deep into your operating system. Your resolver would have to ask for consent every time you click on a website, right? Or it's something that is built into a browser. Does that somehow relate to the work that you're doing, or is that completely distinct?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry. Could you rephrase it, please?
To what extent are the rules that you've been presenting similar for approaches where a browser or an operating system is tracking you implicitly and it's not the website that is using cookies or similar techniques?
So the requirements for consent are the same, right? So the requirements are very generic and they cover all kind of technologies, right? So if your operating system is implicitly tracking you, you need to know for which purpose. And okay, the practical question is, where do you find that information? Is it available somewhere? And if this purpose requires consent, then it's the operating system that has to ask you, obviously, for that consent. So our analysis, of course, so our legal paper talks about very high-level requirements and then decomposes them into the low-level requirements when it's applied to web browsers. But the high-level requirements, they apply to any other system too. Did that answer your question?
To some extent. Jana, do you want to say something? Or maybe Jo?
Well, I had a question about liability, and maybe it has some bearing on the previous question about alternative tracking techniques as well. So if we're looking at browser-based techniques, then I assume it cannot be the website's liability anymore the website cannot be liable for illegal practices with respect to consent. I assume that this would be shifting to the browser vendor. But I'd like your views on this. Also in the context of CMPs, what is the liability there? So it looks to me like the publishers are in a very uncomfortable position there because they are including these potentially or usually illegal, non-compliant banners. And so are they actually assuming liability by doing this, or does it remain with the CMP, or what's the situation?
Yeah, so I think I'll just go with the first part of the question about the browsers. So indeed, if the consent is shifted to the browser settings, then of course the browser vendors start playing an important role. Okay, that's just the very quick answer. And to elaborate on the role of those who are collecting consent, I think Cristiana can tell a bit more.
So Nataliia was showing a slide on our work on consent management platforms. And we have studied actually that CMPs are liable within two roles that they assume. So they will be liable as processors because they are processors, but they also assume the role of controllers, data controllers. And for that, they are liable in the sense that they would be initially responsible for lawful collection of consent. So whenever they are deploying dark patterns when collecting consent, they are not respecting all these 7 and also low-level 22 requirements that we've mentioned in the initial talk. And so we have understood in our Compro paper that they are liable also as controllers because they go forth than being just processors, than just showing and offering the service of presenting banners and collecting consent. They actually influence the user's decision-making within this by default configuration settings. And we wanted to give awareness of the fact that they are data controllers, therefore they are liable, and therefore they are actually facing the risks of being fined at a very scalable way. Especially, for example, Nataliia mentioned OneTrust practices when they are implemented through several website publishers' websites, right? And so, yeah, they face fines. And we have actually submitted our feedback to the European Data Protection Board, alerting to this fact. And we are waiting for some feedback for everybody to understand the responsibility that they have, and therefore the liability for their illegal practices. Did I answer to your question?
Well, it sounds like excellent news for the publishers, or did I understand this wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And just by curiosity, deploying dark patterns from the CMP side is just one element that makes CMP liable. So in our empirical work, also with other colleagues, we have understood other very interesting activities that makes CMPs data controllers. So the command in the command of the purposes and the means for processing personal data, and these practices are not of the awareness of publishers at all.
So I just can quickly add what are these practices that we have identified. So except for the most harmful one, which is a manipulative design that we have presented, we also saw that there are some consent banner providers that include other activities. So we found actually one that includes a tracking pixel in the cookie banner. So you insert a banner on your site and the banner starts tracking the users. So we found this type of problems. We found also problems related to scanning. So many of these consent management providers provide you the scanning services so that they will scan your website and then say, okay, we have found such and such number of trackers. You should better update your consent pop-up, or they do it automatically for you. That depends. And the way what exactly they find and which tracking techniques they are able to detect impacts a lot what the publisher will do and how exactly they sort them into purposes, because you see they face now the same problem. They observe cookies or other trackers and they don't know the purpose, and they have some kind of heuristics to put them in the purpose. Again, depending on how correct is that, it will again influence the validity of the consent pop-up. We also found that some consent management providers also have the service of controlling the number, the kind of third parties that are included in your website. We haven't studied this deeply yet from technical perspective, but of course this introduces again a potential problem. And yeah, that's it. I checked my list. Gunesh raised the hand.
Jana is first, please.
Yes, hi, thank you for the interesting presentation. I was wondering whether websites are required in their privacy policy to mention all the tracking techniques that they are using, or is it advisable? And the follow-up question I have on that is whether it would make sense to ask for consent for the different tracking techniques. So for each one of them, ask consent separately, because I mean there is a difference between tracking with third-party cookies where the user can delete them themselves, or more persistent methods like fingerprinting.
Cristiana, you want to take this or I take this? As you want.
I think you posed two questions, but I will try to answer the first, because the second I will ask you to repeat, and then Nataliia can...
I can answer the second.
Okay, so data controllers, so in our stance, website publishers, they need to declare in their privacy policies all the purposes that they have using their tracking technologies. So this is mostly important. And this is mandatory. not only on the privacy policies, but also on the banner itself, to be very explicit. And so at this point, you know that the GDPR and the Privacy Directive are technology neutral. So what is mostly important is the declaration of these purposes. As for the second question, I will ask you, Gunes, to
No, it was
okay.
Jana, and yeah, no, it's the same answer actually. So we haven't. The DPAs are not very specific with respect to the different tracking technologies, and they always try to be all-inclusive because they don't want to miss technology that will show up tomorrow. So what they say, from what I've read, is, again, purposes are the most important. And then you have to, okay, if you want to be fully transparent and compliant, you really should explain the purpose, and then which kind of information is collected and from where and with which tools, with which technologies. So, well, that's the theory. We understand that in practice, this doesn't happen that much. And they have no interest, of course, to be so transparent. Jana, did we answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Ganesh, please.
Thank you so much, Nataliia and Cristiana, for a great presentation and great work. First, like maybe a two-part question. One is that so removal of this like a browser-based one centralized setting in the browser from the ePrivacy Directive. I think disappointed so many because like people hate consent dialogues. Like there's a consent fatigue issue beyond the fairness and dark pattern issues. So do you see any chance of that coming back in one way or other? So I see that, for example, I don't know if you heard, there's these like initiatives called Global Privacy Control. I don't know if you heard of it. Do you see any kind of potential that this is coming back and this like a consent process is getting simpler? And the second question, if I may, is as a researcher who is doing a lot of web measurement studies where you go visit websites and measure certain privacy and security issues, should we take into account these consent dialogues? Because your interaction with the consent dialogues, whether you accept, reject, or give certain give consent to certain users, determines how the web page behaves, right? So how should we take this into account in our web measurement studies? Thank you so much.
Maybe I can take the first part, Nataliia. You build on what I might miss. So thank you for your very important question. There is a big discussion currently on the efficiency of and the applicability of the GPC in Europe, right? So we are very we are paying attention to the potentialities of the GPC and its applicability here in Europe. But we understand that the GPC, as it is now, depending on its specifications in the future, the GPC only does not attend to the purposes, a cornerstone of the GDPR, right? So the GDPR is purpose-based and data controller-based, which are the two premises that the GPC as of today does not account. So unless some of the premises of the GDPC can be extendable or reviewed, as for now is not applicable. Let's see how the privacy regulation draft can consider and export other features.
Okay, so to complement on GPC, so we had conversations with this working group to understand what they do and what this means, and what we understood, and actually you can also check the interview on the CNIL website. It was very nice, very informative. Is that GPC, as it is currently stated, could be used as a way to reject. So it can be used to say, I now reject everything I've agreed upon. So it doesn't matter how you interacted with the banner. Then if the signal is sent, it says, now I just say no to everything to which I said yes before. It's still an open question of whether this is legally makes sense in Europe. We don't know really. But that's the state of affairs today with GPC. Yeah, and then the second question was about the research and web measurements. So yeah, in our latest work, we also, every time we visit websites, it's in the, like a couple of years ago, people were just saying, we didn't interact with websites, we just crawled, But today is no longer possible, at least if you are coming from Europe, right? And well, we believe as a community, we should really build the infrastructure to interact with this type of banners. Like, at some point, OpenWPM was built to help people do easily the web privacy measurement. I think we need the same thing for the interaction with banners. We must have it, otherwise we don't know what we are looking at, right? And there were a couple of works that did this to some extent. So there was this tool called Consent-O-Matic by Nowens and others in CHI last year, which is only working with IAB Europe TCF banners, so the same type of banners that we have studied in our work. And then there was another paper by Sanchez and others. It's called something like Can I Opt Out Yet?, where they made an extension in order to record the interactions with the banners, though I'm not sure it's actually interacting with them automatically. The problem with this tool so far is that you need really a lot of support, right, for the continuous upgrades of the tools. For example, our tool that helped you look into the consent string is already outdated, and we currently don't have an engineer who will work on this continuously. So I think as a community we need to, whenever possible, to invest in this kind of tools and make it open and make it easy to use, and that's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nataliia.
Will you do that, Gunesh? Can we count on you?
I don't know. Maybe we should collaborate. Yes. Thank you.
All right. I think we're approaching the end of the discussion session here. Are there more questions from anyone? Then raise them now. Otherwise, I want to announce that we probably have another CIF seminar on the 22nd of June on accountable software vulnerability handling between responsible state behavior and just intelligent norms from Stefano Frantim from the CIF department, from the law faculty. We might have another talk at the beginning of June on safety security co-assurance, which is not sure yet. But anyway, after the 22nd of June, I think we're going to take 2 months of summer break and return to you with exciting talks in September. I don't see any more questions. So Nataliia and Cristiana, I want to thank you very much for this insightful talk. Thanks a lot. And I hope we see you again here. And I close the recording now, and we can, I don't know, chat for another 5 minutes or whatever, but thanks a lot.